Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. This evening, I'm delighted to be joined by author Tom Mead, who's going to be talking about his latest book, The Murder Wheel, which actually my camera's in the wrong way, is out tomorrow. So we've got a pre-publication chat with Tom. I'm just going to put Tom's name in the chat there so that we can
Oh,
see who he
yes,
is. There
there
we
it is.
go.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this evening, Tom. And it wasn't so long ago that we were talking about your first book, so The Deaf and the Conjurer, which is the first book in the Joseph Spector. Oh, you've got
There it
great.
is. Yes, that's the paperback.
Yeah. So, would you like to tell us about The Murder Wheel?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's nice to be back, Karen. You're right. It doesn't seem too long ago, and of
No,
course, it
not at
was
all.
only February that Death and the Conjurer came out in hardback. So it has been a very busy, very hectic year, 2023. But it's been lovely to sort of to meet so many people and to do the rounds of events and actually talk to readers in person. I met Sam Brownlee at Capital Crime back in September.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just lovely to feel that I'm part of a crime fiction community now, which is it's delightful. But the Murder Wheel is the sequel to Death and the Conjurer. It's a vintage style 1930s set, a golden age inspired murder mystery. It's very much a puzzle mystery where the emphasis is on not only the who done it, but also the how of the seemingly impossible crimes, where it appears that there's no physical way that the crimes could have been committed. So in that respect, that it's very much a locked room mystery, as the first novel was. It sees the return of my fictional detective, who is the retired music hall magician Joseph Spector, and we return to a location that cropped up in Death and the Conjurer, but here it takes on a much more significant role, and that is the fictional West End theatre, the Pomegranate, which I'm a huge fan of theatrical murder mysteries
Mm,
and theatres as settings in fiction generally,
yeah.
just because I love to be swept along by the atmosphere of a theatre when you're in the audience, but also the folklore, the sort of mythic quality that surrounds it,
Mm,
the ghost stories, the superstitions, the traditions. I find it all
yeah.
fascinating, and so I've tried to distill some of that into the Murder Wheel. It's set in 1938, and yes, once again, my conjurer detective is embroiled in a string of bizarre, convoluted, incredibly complicated crimes, which only he, with his knack for explaining the inexplicable, can resolve.
Because I mean, Joseph Spector, for people who are watching and who haven't come across Joseph Spector, he's first appears in Death of the Conjurer. Um, I think he's a really, when the first time you meet him, you're not really sure about him, but he really does grow on you. I really loved the second book. Would you was he sort of influenced by anybody when you?
Yes, definitely. I would say that as a character, he's obviously part of the golden age tradition of
Yeah,
amateur detectives. This character archetype in fiction of
yeah,
the sort of the mysterious, slightly enigmatic, reclusive character who's got
yeah,
this knack for insight, for unraveling puzzles, and who is put to use by baffled Scotland Yard in this instance.
Yeah.
So in that respect, he's very much part of that tradition, and he's inspired by the likes of course, Sherlock Holmes, Auguste Dupin, John Dixon Carr's detectives, Gideon Fell, and Sir Henry Merivale. And numerous others, of course. But as a magician detective, the characterization is it comes from a few different real life figures. I'm fascinated by stage magic and the history of
Mhm.
stage magic. So I tend to do a lot of reading around the subject matter. And Harry Houdini is, of course, an obvious reference point. He's
Yeah.
arguably the most famous and influential of the illusionists in the uh, late 19th century into the early 20th. Um, and what has always struck me as interesting about Harry Houdini, obviously, he cultivated this remarkable persona, this stage persona,
Mhm.
and of course, he was famed for his exploits as an escapologist, his famous stunts, and his incredible feats. But what has also interested me about him as a character was his knack for exposing scams and fraudulent psychics and phony seances and that kind of thing. He was, for all the mystique that surrounds him as a performer, he was somebody who had his feet very firmly on the ground and who was adept at exposing the phony mediums
Mm.
that sprung up in the wake of the Great War, for example. So I think that combination of someone who is a performer and
Yeah.
who's able to uh, uh, control and manipulate an audience, and who has an understanding for the gimmicks and
Yeah.
the clever tricks that are used by illusionists, but also in the murder wheel by clever criminals. Um, and also, along with that, a knack for cutting to the chase, a sense of logic, and a keen eye for detail. So it's that kind of combination that
Yeah.
feeds into the characterization of Spectre.
Because I think I mean, he, as Flint, is the Scotland Yard detective who sort of, in this book, we've got the character of Edward Ibbs, who is he is what's the word? God, my brain has gone completely. It's my
Well,
coldy brain. He's yeah. Do
yes.
you say it because you know it better?
Well, I mean, Ibs is sort of he's our protagonist, really.
That's the
He's the
word.
lens. He's the lens through which we see the events
Yeah.
unfold. He's the character that we follow rather than Spectre, because I like the idea of having the detective as someone who is actually um quite an enigmatic presence in the novel,
Yeah.
who has an air of something slightly otherworldly about him. That also comes from my reading of um, Agatha Christie's short story collection, The Mysterious Mr. Quinn. There we have a
Yeah.
detective who is who throughout there's a sense that he has something unnatural, something slightly
Yeah.
otherworldly about him. The way that he seems
He
to
appears,
appear
doesn't
from
he?
nowhere
Yeah.
and this kind of thing. And I like that idea. I like having a detective who has all those unanswered questions surrounding him and has
Mm.
that kind of that sort of air about him. Another influence would be the American short story writer Edward D. Hoke. He had a series character who appeared in numerous short stories, who was called Simon Ark, who was uh, a a kind of nomadic sleuth who would always turn up when there was a mystery to be solved, and who had it, and who was drawn to seemingly supernatural and inexplicable phenomena, but who would always find the earthly rational solution. But Simon Ark himself, there were so many unanswered questions about him as a character. There was a
Yeah.
hint that he had some sort of supernatural powers about him, and I find that fascinating. That the mysteries were earthbound and logical, but the character had
Yeah.
something other about him. And so I'm trying to do that with Spectre. That's why in the Murder Wheel we have Ibs, who is he's a young lawyer. He is
Oh,
sorry about
life.
that. And
Okay, that's right.
he is a lawyer. He's got a certain naivety to him. He's a newly qualified as a lawyer, and he's very much a kind of
Yeah.
greenhorn who's roped into an unusual investigation. He's working for the defense team for a woman who's been accused of murdering her husband, and this is what leads him into this complicated web of conspiracy which unfurls backstage at the Pomegranate Theatre, and that is how he encounters Spectre. So Ibs is very much he's our protagonist. I'm fascinated by the Hitchcockian idea of the wrong man, the guy who is essentially an innocent, who is a likable kind of everyman character, but who is
Yeah.
in the wrong place at the wrong time. And
Yeah.
Ibs, he very much meets that criteria as far as I'm concerned. He is
Yes.
constantly in the wrong place at the wrong time, and ends up wrongly accused of murder, and falls afoul of Inspector Flint, and only Spectre can get him out of the mess that he finds himself in.
Because he is, isn't he? Like, you sort of think bad day, but he has like a bad to ever, like he is literally everywhere. And there was a point actually in the book where I was thinking, well, is this sort of like a Roger Ackroyd sort of,
Yeah,
am I
yeah.
going down, is this going to be like and I was like, no, no. But actually, my next question leads nicely into that about the planning, because it is complicated. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of things that happen. And so how do you plan that? Because I mean, have you got about 6 spreadsheets, or is it
Well, yeah. I mean, what I tend to do is I've talked in the past when asked about this. I usually talk about timelines.
Yeah,
I like to keep a very um, detailed timeline and sequence of events so that I know
yeah,
the order in which things will unfold. Um, but what I would also do is keep a parallel timeline. So essentially, what I have is I have what really happened. So I have the way that things really unfold as they are
yeah,
eventually revealed at the denouement. But then I will
yeah,
also have what the reader thinks happened. So I will have a separate timeline where the effects, the illusions are
yeah,
outlined. So that's how I tend to do it. And you'll see that these timelines, there are points where they converge, points where they veer apart, and
yeah,
it's an interesting exercise, and I find it quite useful. Just structuring the novel, because as you say, there's a lot in it. It's not a long book, neither is Death and the
no,
Conjurer. That comes from Golden Age mysteries, which tended to be on the shorter side.
mm,
But for its comparatively short word count, I like to keep it quite densely packed with incident and with
yeah,
characters. So I think it's a case of less is more. That's my approach. I think it's more about packing in as much as you can, rather than padding out the prose itself.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I really like that because I think you get a real sort of ride of, from when you start, you're in it and it's, I mean, you're just like constantly to the point where sometimes you're like you said, you have these sort of things where you think you're going in one direction and then you we take us off into
Mm.
somewhere else and think, well, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
is it difficult? Is it something that you do when you sort of start the novel that you have to sort of put in the clues sort of afterwards or do you do them as you go? Because obviously you want to give the reader a chance to solve it. But obviously you don't also want to give away too much so that they
Mm.
guess it and go, oh, I knew who that was going to be.
Yeah, it's quite a delicate balance. It is a plate spinning act essentially. Uh, in effect, it usually ends up being a combination of different approaches. Some clues will be there from the beginning, and I will
Yeah.
know what they are, and I will know what role they have to play in the way things will unfold. But I like to leave myself with a bit of room, and a bit of
Mm.
scope to have a bit of fun and throw in a few bits and pieces, the red herrings, etc.,
Yeah.
which will which are more sort of organic as I'm writing. They will occur, and I will think, that can go in there. But then, of course, I like to try out the books
Yeah.
before they see the light of day. They're read by multiple different readers who are very well versed in the mystery genre. So I like
Mm.
to see if it passes their test. And I don't mind if readers spot the odd trick here and there.
Yeah.
I think that's good because you know it uh, it reassures them that they're playing the game correctly, if
Yeah.
they get a few things right
Yeah.
here and there. But I think as long as the main who and how are as long as the who and how remain a mystery
Yeah.
until Spectre reveals all at the end, then I'm happy. I don't mind if people spot a few little tricks here and there on
Yeah.
the way.
But you want him to be the moment. He needs to have his moment.
He does.
When you sort of plot your book, do you like when you sort of came up with this story, what did you start with? Did you start with the characters? Did you start with the crime? How did you go about it?
Well, I started at the very beginning with the image of a Ferris wheel. I wanted there to be a crime that took place on a Ferris wheel. The title, obviously, the murder wheel, comes from that. But
Yeah,
as I was writing and as I was plotting it out, it occurred to me that the wheel itself was quite an effective analogy for the way the plot is structured. So we begin on a Ferris wheel, we end on a Ferris wheel, and the idea of things coming full circle. So that's how it ended up with that title of the murder wheel.
yeah,
It's one of those titles where you've got the image of the Ferris wheel, but also this more abstract sense of things coming full circle, and things which at the beginning make no sense, all of a sudden at the end their significance becomes apparent. So that's where it began. Originally, I wanted it was my idea for the focal point of the story to be the murder on the Ferris wheel. But as I was plotting it, I realized I was being drawn instead in the direction of the theatre. So
yeah,
the murder on the Ferris wheel is the jumping off point for the
yeah,
plot. But in fact, most of the action takes place in the theatre, the Pomegranate, and there are two subsequent uh, seemingly impossible murders which take place at the theatre during this
yeah,
one this one incredibly tense and dramatic night. Unlike the first book, the murder wheel is set over a single night by and
Yeah.
large. It's primarily set in a single 24-hour period, and I think that adds an interesting element of pace to things. It
Yeah.
gives things more of a kind of propulsive sense of you're racing towards something,
Yeah.
which is again fun and enjoyable for me as a writer. There are several great mysteries that do that, which I enjoy. Frederick Brown, he wrote a great one called Night of the Jabberwock, which is the title, of course, comes from Lewis Carroll, and
It is.
and that is set over a single night, as the title implies, and it's a very kind of the title also gives you a hint that it's a very surreal and strange mystery where the weird twists and strange atmosphere is really piled on as things progress. The same goes for Joel Townsley Rogers' The Red Right Hand, another brilliant novel set over a single night where things there's a sense of otherness as things progress. You think there's no way
Mm.
that this is all going to unravel in a satisfactory fashion, because there are just such a kind of piling on of strangeness, but of course it does in both of those cases. John Dixon Carr's The Arabian Nights Murder is another one where things just seem so bizarre and inexplicable.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to capture with this one. I've had fun leaning into the surreal and
Mm.
the more colourful, heightened aspects of the mystery, but at the same time, I'm working to keep it grounded and logical within its own established
Mm.
sense of logic and logical framework. So yeah, so that's the goal with the murder wheel. Whether it pays off is not for me to say, but that was the idea behind it.
No, I mean it definitely. I mean, I think the sort of, as I said just now, the pace is really, it's, and I don't think you realize. I mean, there's several parts in the book, and I'm not going to give them away because that would be, massive spoilers. But where you go, no, that can't happen. And that's really, I really like that. I like a book that's surprised, because you do sort of go along thinking, oh, this is going to happen. Da, da, da. But I think, yeah, with those sort of really like, um, you know, impossible things that are supposed to happen, and you think, well, they can't be impossible, but they seem impossible. So it's yeah, no, it's a really, really good read. And I think the other bit that I really enjoyed about the book was the inclusion of the magic and the illusions. And obviously you've done a lot of research and you're interested in magic, but is it hard to write that into, as prose, because obviously don't want to give away too much as well. um but the reader needs to understand, you
Mm,
know sort of how
yeah.
it's done.
Yeah, there is a part of the novel which hinges on the mechanics of a magic trick, which is
Yeah.
being performed on stage. And during the performance of the magic trick,
Yeah.
a murdered corpse appears on stage, seemingly out of thin air. So, in order to try and unravel that impossibility, the investigators need to understand how the trick was supposed to work. So in that
Yeah.
respect, it becomes a trick within a trick, if you
Yeah.
like. And so writing about the magic tricks, it is the trickiest part, I would say. It's the most difficult
Mm.
aspect of it because, of course, you are trying to make it readable and comprehensible, but at the same time, you
Yeah.
need the reader to understand the precise way in which the trick is worked,
Yeah.
because that's quite pivotal to the plot. So that's why I have included a little diagram in the hardcover edition,
Yeah.
to just demonstrate how the trick is supposed to work.
Yeah.
But I'm not averse to giving away magic tricks
Yeah.
in the story, because I'm fascinated by how magic tricks are done. That is something that has always appealed to me.
Mm.
I'm always drawn to stage magic, not to be tricked, but to try and to understand and pick apart
Yeah.
gimmicks used by magicians. And also, I find that if you give away the occasional trick or gimmick here and there, it's an effective misdirection technique from the
Mm.
overarching mystery.
Yeah.
If you let the reader understand certain bits and pieces, which are essentially superficial to the mystery, it can help with uh, you know, leading them wherever you want them to go further
Yeah.
down the line, you know.
Yeah. It's almost like a distraction because you're sort of focusing on that
Yeah,
so much and thinking, well, how does that happen? And who
yeah,
is,
yeah.
but
That's it.
so
Yeah, that's it
it's
exactly.
almost like the sleight of hand of like what's going on over here because we're
Mm.
focusing on over here.
Yeah, and it's it's all part of the fun of it. I like to keep things pacey, keep things moving, and keep things uh, fairly tongue in cheek. I think there's an element of playfulness in the
Yeah.
story. Obviously, we've mentioned Ibs, the unluckiest man alive,
Yeah.
as it appears in this story, because he's constantly in the wrong place at the wrong time, and uh, and over this single night, he finds himself embroiled in this increasingly complicated conspiracy. But of course, by the time we reach dawn of the following morning, the whole thing has been unravelled by Spectre. So I like to. I think it's important essentially for the mystery to be an entertainment as well. So
Mm.
it's about presenting an intellectual challenge to the reader.
Yeah.
I'm encouraging them to play along and to see, can you spot who done it? Can you spot how this trick was worked? So I'm making a conscious effort to plant the clues there,
Mm.
and to keep them in plain sight, but not to make them obvious.
No.
But then at the same time, it's also about a sense of playing the game, of playing a game with the
Yeah.
reader. So it's not purely an intellectual exercise. It's also about
No.
being sort of swept along by things.
Because the other thing that featured in the book, which I love, is a book within a book.
Yes.
So you can't beat it. I love a book in a book. And so
Mm.
the master of manipulation
Yes.
is very much sort of, a key, isn't it, to the sort of part
It
of the plot.
it is, yes. So there's a fictional book within the book, which, as you say, is called The Master of Manipulation. It is inspired by a real book, which remains a very influential book within the world of magic. And the interesting thing about this book is that nobody knows who wrote it. It's published under a pseudonym, but unlike so
Interesting.
many other literary mysteries, no one has ever managed to identify who the author is. And
Oh.
that was very appealing to me as an idea of
Mm.
a book which gives away a magician's secrets, but whose authorship remains a mystery. I grew up watching the Channel 5 show, the masked magician who would give away the magician's secrets,
Yeah.
breaking the magician's code, etc. And so I like the idea of incorporating that into the plot here, by effectively modeling the Master of Manipulation on the real life book, which, as I say, remains in use as a guide for conjurers, but which at the time was particularly controversial,
Mm.
because mainly because of the mystery surrounding the authorship.
I mean, and I guess it's one of those things that we're probably never going to find out now because it's gone too far. It's not like,
Exactly.
well, yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it's just, I guess it's just whoever did it didn't want
Yeah.
to be found,
Yes,
and they've
that's
done a
right.
really good, they've done
Yeah,
a really good
and they
job.
were evidently a professional magician, and so they
Yeah,
knew how to keep secrets.
yeah,
But the authorship of The Master of Manipulation, which is the fictional book that appears within the Murder Wheel, the authorship is revealed at the end, but part of the mystery is unraveling who would want to publish this scandalous book which will give away the magician's secrets.
yeah,
And could that be a motive for murder, that kind of thing, or is it just a red herring? But yes, I'm a big fan of the biblio mystery, the mystery about books,
yeah.
and so I wanted to pay homage to that in a way in the Murder Wheel as well.
Yeah, I love it, and obviously you do a lot of research, and using you're obviously very well read in sort of golden age crime, but also in your. So do you? Does the research? Is it almost like it's never like a chore for you? It's almost like the good
Hmm.
part of the job.
Yeah, pretty much, because I think if the research doesn't interest me, then there's not much point trying to crowbar it into a story. So
Yeah.
I will focus on the aspects that interest me, and I will build the story around them
Mm.
rather than trying to crowbar in all this detail
Yeah.
which doesn't appeal to me. So it's a lot of the research comes beforehand. So parts of the novel will be suggested by certain real life incidents or um, unexplained phenomena, for example, where I think
Yeah.
that could be a fun basis for an impossible crime or a trick that will be worked. But then when it comes to things like period detail and
Yeah.
that sort of aspect of the work, that will usually come afterwards. So I will build the plot and the character and the sequence of events, but then in the writing, I will be focusing more on the authenticity, the
Mm.
verisimilitude of it, making it seem real. Of course, with an impossible crime story, it's not an exercise in literary naturalism. It's not a realistic book. It's not meant to be.
No.
It works within its own sense of logic, but as we've said before, it's about being swept along and buying into it, and playing along, playing the game, seeing if you can
Yeah.
crack the mystery. So I like to make it as authentic as I can, but hopefully not at the expense of the plot.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I guess some people will start with like, "Oh, I want to write a book about this period," and then have to, like you say, to try and build that around it. So to do it the other way around sort of makes it
Yeah.
feel more, like you say, authentic and
Yeah, I think the thing for me is, and not so much that it is relentlessly authentic, but that it has that it feels authentic. So
yeah,
if it's it's about giving it a sense of authenticity, but not being overbearing, not making it feel
no,
sort of leaden with all that research. So
yeah.
it's again, it's a bit of a delicate balance, but it's all part of the fun of it, really.
And how do you find the editing process? Do you is that a good thing for you or a are you a sort of like write the first draft and then, or is your first draft pretty as you would like it to be?
No, I do edit extensively. Mainly in response to reader reports. So obviously,
Yeah,
I'll try it out on people, and I will. Obviously, I also have professional editors
yeah,
at Mysterious Press. I worked with Otto Penzler to begin with, and uh, I have a great editor in the UK at Head of Zeus as well. But
yeah,
the main thing for me will be the responses of my beta readers,
yeah,
my people who are there who can spot a plot hole or an inconsistency, and who can tell me whether a mystery works or not. Because really, and I think this is true of magicians as well, you don't know if you've got a successful act until you try it in front of an
no,
audience.
no,
To me, that's all part and parcel. And the editing process is, um, it's the perhaps more laborious aspect of it, because
mm,
you are essentially dissecting your own work, but it's also the most important aspect. And by the end of it, that is when you feel that you've got a finished product.
yeah. Um, you were talking about John Dixon Carr, and we talked about him on our last,
Yeah.
and you have converted my husband. Um, so
Wonderful.
we went to London not long after I interviewed you last time, and we went and he bought his first John Dixon Carr novel, which I can't remember the name of. Um,
There are so
and
many, that's the
yeah,
thing.
and now he's literally working his way through them, and yeah, so you've
Oh,
created a. I mean, he's a big Agatha Christie fan, and he really loves that. We read the one about the one that's set in Devon about the, and I'm seeing if I can glance it here from where I'm sitting. It's about the judge suddenly at
oh,
his residence.
a seat of the scornful is the John
That's the
Dixon
one.
Carr.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, yeah,
a
yeah. That's
terrific
it.
one. Yes,
With the
yeah.
judge and the daughter, and yeah, we were supposed to read it together, but we ended up reading it separately. But I was, again, yeah, that's sort of amazing. So yeah, so you've made a new super fan of
I'm
John
so
Dixon Carr.
glad. Yes, I always make a point of mentioning John Dixon Carr, because he is the author that I keep coming back to. He is the author
Mm,
who's it's funny with murder mysteries. It might seem counterintuitive to reread them once you know who done it, because surely the point is the unraveling of the mystery. But
yeah,
with John Dixon Carr, and with certain others, Agatha Christie, Ellery Queen, there is it's almost more rewarding to read it once you know who done it, because then you can see how clever the writer is and how
yeah,
ingeniously you were tricked, because you can spot the clues and you can see the psychological game that the writer has played. And I think Carr is particularly satisfying as a writer in that respect.
yeah. I mean, I didn't see. I thought I knew when I was reading that one. I was like, oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I know who it is. I know who it is all the way through. And then I was like, no.
Well, they're a great one for the golden age mystery writers. Generally are a great one for the double bluff.
Yeah,
So I think that's something that I like to try and have a bit of fun with as well when I'm
yeah,
writing, because they were writing for an audience that had read so many murder mysteries and knew how they worked and
yeah,
knew the kinds of tricks that mystery writers would play. And so some of the greats, Ellery Queen is a good one for this. They would create these elaborate double bluffs, these false solutions to the mystery, to really bamboozle the reader, the canny, clever reader who thinks they know what's going on and thinks they've outsmarted the writer. They will then sort of pull the rug out from under you and reveal that you had it wrong the whole time. And Carr is great at that as well.
because I think it's really interesting how that sort of golden age has come around again, because I think we were all, there's so many different genres within crime now, and obviously the reader has got much more sort of accessible tools at their hands, where before they didn't have that. But even so, I think people have gone back to that sort of. Do you think that's the appeal of the golden age, and the sort of renaissance of the golden age coming back, is because people like that sort of more simple, you haven't got somebody on their phone or going to the
Yes. You're right
uh,
that period mysteries, obviously, there is a sense of nostalgia for a
yeah,
pre-technological age, certainly,
yeah,
and it certainly makes it easier to construct an elaborate, impossible scenario, which wouldn't work in 2023.
mm,
It's much easier um, to control an audience's perception, because
yeah.
the character is doesn't have all that information at their fingertips. But I think I mentioned before about creating your own logical framework, and I think this is an example of that, because setting it at the height of the golden age of detective fiction, you are also uh, depriving your characters of technology, of mobile
Yeah.
phones, of things like that. And so it's essentially it's the same as putting on a performance in front of an audience. You're guiding their attention, and you're essentially establishing your own parameters by which to do that. So yeah, it's easier in a way to mystify your characters, because
Yeah.
they simply don't have the resources to unravel, to pick apart an inexplicable scenario in the way that they would today.
Well, it's like in the beginning of the Murder Wheel, is that we're referred to a newspaper, aren't we? He's reading the newspaper, and he's reading about his, and that's pretty much the only sort of outside look at
Mm,
what's going on,
yeah.
was the newspaper. And that was maybe once a day you might see something. You couldn't, there wasn't just, there wasn't there wasn't television. I
Hmm.
mean, there was the radio. I don't know how much the radio would have had on. Probably not that much, unless it was
Well,
like
yeah, I mean the Ferris wheel murder case, the way that it's covered and the way that it's discussed by the characters, and the newspaper coverage that you mentioned there, which is referred to in the first part of the book.
yeah,
A lot of that was suggested by my reading of the newspaper coverage of certain real life famous cause celebre murder cases
mm,
from the era in question. So an example would be the Julia Wallace murder case, in which her husband, William Herbert Wallace, was considered to be the prime suspect in his wife's murder. He had an alibi, supposedly, which was established via a very mysterious telephone call which he received at his club where he was playing chess, and it became such a it took hold of the public imagination, and
mm,
it became almost like a game to try and pick apart this man's alibi and to work out how he could conceivably have murdered his wife. And in that respect, it's a very gruesome, ghoulish phenomenon, but
mm,
it's something that I've tried to re-examine in what is essentially a gender inverted murder case, which has a lot of similar trappings. Although obviously here we've got the Ferris wheel, we've got all the surface elements are different. And as I say,
yeah,
it is a woman who is accused of murdering her husband in this instance. But the way
yeah,
that it's discussed and the way that the kind of lurid coverage of it,
yeah,
it comes primarily from from cases like the Wallace murder.
Mm. That's really interesting. I think in it again, it sort of does add to that. You know, when you find out that after reading it, you sort of think that even adds to even more to the authenticity. Oh, I can't even get my word out. You know, authenticity. I can't say it. You know what I mean?
I do.
Realness.
Yes, I do. Yeah. I mean, the Wallace case in particular was very influential on Golden Age mystery writers at the
Mm.
time. People like Marjorie Allingham, Dorothy L. Sayers, they wrote non-fiction studies of the Wallace case. Agatha Christie refers to it numerous times in her works. If you know what you're looking for, you can spot references to the Wallace murder case. There's an overt example in Evil Under the Sun, which I remember particularly well. But even, you know, coming forward to the present day, in the in the 2000s, I think P.D. James wrote a study of the case in which she reassessed it from a contemporary viewpoint. So the Wallace case was particularly
Mm.
influential. It had the appearance of being a locked room mystery, although it wasn't. But just the strange, unexplained details of it, which mainly came from the suspect, William Herbert Wallace, uh, they just they just really captured the imagination of the British
Yeah.
public. And William Herbert Wallace, obviously, he was charged with the murder, but he was acquitted. But then, for the remainder of his life, there was that constant unanswered question, because no other suspect was ever charged. So it was that idea of, you know, had he got away with the murder? And
Yeah.
I think that cast a real shadow over the public imagination. And as I say,
Mm.
mystery writers at that time, they really seized on that.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's like sort of true crime now. I mean, true crime is again is another one of those things that, you know, people are absolutely fascinated with, you know,
Mm,
going back as far as, you know, like the Jack the Ripper, you know,
mm,
and those sort of the Whitechapel murders, all those sorts
definitely.
of things. People are sort of fascinated with that side of it. And maybe not as, you know, not as gruesome as those, but actually bringing it into so that people do, you know, are really
Yeah.
fascinated with that side of
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. I mean, I am as well. I have a fascination with true crime, whether that's historical or whether that is current, present day crimes. You know, your true crime documentaries, etc. But
Yeah,
I think it's particularly appealing to me to inject an element of authenticity via my reading around true crimes and real life police
mm,
investigations from the era that I'm writing about. Hence
yeah,
my reference to Julia Wallace. There are other examples like the Thompson and Bywaters case, which was actually the previous decade, but which was similarly lurid in the way that it was covered by the press and in the way that that Edith Thompson was vilified. She was portrayed as this kind of femme fatale, and I've tried to incorporate elements of that into the characterization of Carla
yeah.
Dean, who is the accused murderer in the murder wheel.
No, it's I mean, she was a you know, the characters I think were really. I think they always add to the book, and I think I really enjoyed the characters in this book. And as you go through, I think Ibs was. I think he was actually one of my favorite characters. I think I really liked him. I think he was he like you say the most unluckiest man. And you're just like, oh, for goodness sake, what are you going to do now? Just go
Yeah,
and sit.
that's it.
Just go and sit in
Um,
a cupboard somewhere and don't go and do it. But
that's
he's
it.
um so I was going I've lost my place now where I was going to ask you my next question. So this is book 2.
Mhm.
Um so are there plans for book 3, book 4?
There are, yes, indeed. So, book one was Death and the Conjurer. There it is. This is the paperback, which came out a few weeks ago. And then, obviously, this book is The Murder Wheel. Book three is going to be coming out next summer, and it's going to be called Cabaret Macabre. So again, the title probably gives you an idea that I'm having a lot of fun, a lot of I suppose darkly humorous fun with incredibly convoluted mystery, which is also very theatrical in its nature. It's different in that it is a country house mystery. The first two books were set mainly in central London.
Yeah.
Book three, Cabaret Macabre, is in fact largely set at a supposedly haunted house out in the country. So again, I'm able to really amp up the atmosphere, and what we have is a family of incredibly unlikable characters being picked off.
Oh, good. A dysfunctional family.
Exactly, which again is a classic feature of Golden Age mystery, but they are being
Yeah.
picked off one by a seemingly phantom assailant in various lurid, gruesome ways. So of course, Spectre is back again as the the voice of logic and reason in the face of all this seemingly inexplicable phenomena. The book three has got a considerably higher body count than the first two. It's in a way to satisfy my taste for theatre, my love of live performance. It's a deliberate retelling of the Jacobean tragedy, the Revenger's Tragedy, the Thomas Middleton play. So if you know that play, you will have fun spotting bits and pieces within the book. There are various conscious references throughout. But aside from that, we're away from the theatre, so we're more into the realm of the ghost stories and the atmosphere of the haunted house. Although
That sounds amazing.
I should say that the denouement does take place at a film studio at Shepperton Studio. So I've kept a sense of performance and of
Yeah.
a kind of behind the scenes air to it, which I enjoyed in the Murder Wheel. So that's Cabaret Macabre, and as I say, it comes out next summer. I believe it will be August the 1st, unless that date changes. But for now,
Yeah.
that's the provisional date.
Oh, that's too far. Too long.
Yes, well, I've got used to doing two a year, so
Yeah, no,
yeah, it's
it's
only
well,
one next year though.
I was gonna say that was it. My next thing was to say, that must be, quite a ride in as much of as, from going to being published and having two out in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
And you were published, and you're published in America as well. So
Mm.
that must be, that must have been quite full on for you the last sort of 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I have done my best to, embrace it and to really go for it. And I have
Yeah.
enjoyed immensely um, doing the rounds of festivals, library events, bookshop events, and talking to readers and just sort of sharing my enthusiasm and my love of the impossible crime genre.
Yeah.
This is why I'm quick to recommend John Dixon Carr, Ellery Queen, Helen McCloy, Christiana Brand, all these big names, whilst I'm also talking about my own books, because I'm, just so keen to share my love of the genre, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at some questions. Sarah's saying, "Hi, Karen and Tom," and Sarah's asked, "Who is your go-to author to buy?"
Oh, hi, Sarah. Yes, I have corresponded with Sarah on social media. Hi, Sarah. So who's my go-to author to buy? Well, there are a few. At the moment, I am reading a lot of Paul Doherty. He is a very prolific author of historical mysteries, which many of which feature impossible crimes, but which are also brilliant golden age style mystery plots. He's got several great series set in medieval England. He's also got a terrific series set in ancient Egypt. So he is an author who, as I say, he's very prolific. He's got, I
Mm.
believe, over 100 novels since 1986. So whenever there's a new Paul Doherty, I will always rush to get hold of a copy.
Yeah.
An abiding favourite whom I love, whose work is being steadily translated into English, is the French author Paul Altair. He writes fantastic locked room mysteries. Some of the very best that I've read. I would put him up there with the Golden Age greats. I think he's superb. So whenever one of his books is translated by Locked Room International, that's his publisher, I
Mhm.
will always get hold of that. And currently, I'm really enjoying the Pushkin Vertigo translations of various Japanese mystery authors whose works have not necessarily appeared in English before. So one that I enjoyed recently was Yukito Ayatsuji's The Mill House Murders. That is a terrific book. And I'm also loving the Seishi Yokomizo translations, although they go back a long way. Yokomizo died in, I think, 1981, and a lot of these novels are from the Golden Age. They've
Mm.
never appeared in English before, so they've been translating them steadily, and I will always buy those when they appear.
Yeah, translated crime fiction. My husband's been reading some of the Japanese ones, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce the names of them. But again, he's been absolutely fascinated by, and I think it's we've had like we've had sort of Italian ones and Spanish ones, for a while. But actually, the Japanese crime is
Mm.
quite a new.
Yeah, I think it's quite closely linked to the renewed interest in the Golden Age, because so
Mm,
many of these great Japanese mystery authors were effectively developing the puzzle plot and taking it into new interesting directions. You would have very complicated, complex plots, but then you would also have very gruesome, lurid, gory crimes,
yeah,
which would not necessarily have passed muster in the Golden Age. So
yeah,
it's interesting to see, it's and it's fascinating, particularly to me. As you know, I'm drawn to the puzzle, and
yeah.
nobody does a multifaceted puzzle plot like the great Honkaku and Shin Honkaku Japanese authors.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's I mean it's and I guess maybe they've come into their own because the readers now who are reading the Golden Age are more used to that gruesome, because we're
Yeah,
we're probably a little bit desensitized to that, we're
yeah.
used to reading stuff, whereas back then it was more shocking and more sheltered, I guess, from it.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly explain why Seishi Yokomizo, for instance, was not translated into English sooner, because the
Mm,
books are flawless, brilliant mysteries. They're incredibly complex. I imagine a real challenge for a translator, but but the quality is just so high
yeah.
that it's it's just such a treat that they're finally seeing the light of day in English translation.
No, we're really lucky. And I'm looking at the time and seeing that we're nearly at 8 o'clock. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us because it's been really interesting. I love the book. The Murder Wheel is out tomorrow.
It
Ta-da! I've
is.
got
It's
my
out
lovely phone.
tomorrow.
I'll keep going that way. Yeah, double. Well, we've got one each way, one going each way. Um, yeah, no, it's a really great read. And if you haven't read The Death of the Conjurer, I would you can read them. You can read them standalone. They don't need to be read together. But actually, I would definitely recommend reading both of them if you're going to, because I think otherwise, I mean, you can pick, you can read it on its own, can't you? But it's
Oh, you can. They're, I mean, for instance, with Agatha Christie, you don't have to read the Poirot novels in order. They are
no,
standalone mysteries. But I agree with you. I think it is doubly enjoyable if you are
yeah,
seeing the progress of a series.
yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us this
Yes.
evening, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Tom.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Bye.
Bye bye.